I want to introduce myself so you can understand my background. My father is Korean, born in Seoul, and then immigrated to the West. Studied at Wheaton College, where he met my mom, who was a fifth-generation Chinese-American from Honolulu, Hawaii. She's fully American. She doesn't even consider herself Chinese. She didn't speak Chinese until she became a missionary on the mission field. So you have an Asian American, completely Americanized, and a first-generation Korean coming together, a mixture of cultures. They married, and then my father was getting a Ph.D. in St. Louis at the Lutheran Seminary there on church history, and that's where I was born. But they then joined OMF. I was born in 1966. They joined OMF, the mission agency started by Hudson Taylor, as the first Asian sent from OMF to at the time was all from the West, And so when our family joined, I was 4 years old. I had a twin brother. We were the only Asian families in this mission agency called OMF. But now, if you take a look at OMF, is about 65% Asian, and so it's a reflection of what's taking place in my lifetime. So I arrived on the mission field as a little boy at the age of 4 into Singapore. My father started to teach at DTC and then also at the Singapore Bible College, and then at the age of 8, I moved to Taiwan, where my father started the ATA, Asia Theological Association, traveling into all the countries across Asia and accrediting seminaries. At the time, in the 1970s, it was all the liberal seminaries that had all the money, they had all the libraries, they had all the faculty and all the PhDs. It was the evangelical, they didn't even have seminaries, it was just Bible colleges at the time. But what he did was very strategically, he united all the evangelical Bible colleges, accredited them, and the resources started to come. And now if you take a look throughout Asia, pretty much all the major theological institutions are now evangelical. And he was also very strategic in that he would reach out to the liberal seminaries, but the evangelicals within the liberals and bringing them in. And it's very similar to how I did ministry in China. Even possibly the Lausanne Movement, how, we are primarily an evangelical institution, but we go out and we go to the WCC and we bring all the evangelicals, including John Stott as well, from the Anglican Church and so on. So it's a little more of that kind of a strategy. So I grew up in Asia as a missionary kid, and my parents had the foresight at the time to send me to Chinese school up to 6th grade. And because they knew that one day, and remember this is 1970s during Cultural Revolution, they're saying China's all closed. They just knew that one day China would probably open up and it would be a mega force for missions one day. So they've been praying for us to have that kind of role. So I graduated from high school in Taiwan, moved back to the States, went to Wheaton College where my parents met. My brother also joined me. We were both twins. He married someone from Wheaton. My sister also graduated from Wheaton. My daughter graduated from Wheaton. And I met my wife, who was at Gordon College at Wheaton. She came for a semester. So we're a Wheaton family, just to give you that kind of a background. But then the Lord called me my junior year when I attended the Urbana Conference, 1987. And I've been to 7 Urbanas since then. But 1987 Urbana was my junior year, and that was the mother of all Urbanas. That was Billy Graham spoke there, Elizabeth Elliot, I believe George Verwer. I remember him with the big. Anyways, it was a time when as a young kid, I just said, okay, I wanted to make a lot of money, and I didn't want to be a missionary because I looked at my parents being an OMF. OMF, we're pretty much the poorest of all the mission agencies. So when I went to high school, which is a missionary kids school, we saw this is the IMB, the AG is here, then you have Team and Send and all the OMS, but OMF is down here, And so I was like, I'm never going to be a missionary because we had nothing, because we got the Hudson Taylor spirit. We just trust in God and God provides. And so we didn't have toys. We did have toys, but I'm giving you the sob story of being a missionary kid in a poor mission agency. And so I was like, I'm glad my parents did that, but I'm not, it's not for me. But then my junior year, I gave my life. I said, I want to do missions. I got to work as a computer programmer for 3 years, but then I attended Urbana in 90 and I confirmed that I was going to go full-time into missions. And then that's when I packed my bag and I drove to Boston to start seminary at Gordon-Conwell. And the reason why I went to Gordon-Conwell, because down the road was Gordon College, where I met this gal, Jackie Rowe, or Jackie Hong at the time, and she was also called to missions to China. So I'm just giving you a basics of what took place. But you have to remember 1989 was when Tiananmen Square took place. And that's when the crackdown of thousands of students were sort of slaughtered on Tiananmen Square. And so it was seen as kind of how we see Pakistan maybe today, or when you hear China, that means you're going to die pretty much, because you go there and you're getting shot by the police or get arrested and put in prison. That was sort of the ends of the earth at that time, and especially in the cities. Now there's a movement of the church in the countryside. Millions of people came to Christ, and the churches grew in the countryside, but in the cities, complete absent. It was like a mission field to again. So that's where we felt called to go to China. And so my wife and I, after graduating from Gordon-Conwell, both of us graduated there. She started a couple years after I did. And then I pastored a Chinese church in Boston for a few years, and then that church sent us to China. So we arrived into China 2001, into Kunming first, before going to Beijing in 2003. And I share that story because it took me 14 years from when I raised my hand my junior year in college to eventually arrive onto the mission field. But God had His plan the whole time. Even though it took a long time, it really prepared me for how I was to eventually serve when I eventually moved into Beijing in 2003. Now, I didn't want to be in Kunming. For me, Kunming was like, going off the track, but OMF, and when you're working with a mission agency like 150 years old, you just say yes, especially if your supervisor is James Hudson Taylor IV, And so he was Jamie Taylor, and so if he says you go, you just go, So even though we're friends now, but at the time I was really upset. I was like, why are you sending me to Kunming? It's like going to boondocks. I want to go to Beijing, where I want to influence the future leaders. I want to go and work with students, and I want to work with the future leaders of China. But eventually OMF did allow us to move into Beijing, and we arrived into Beijing 2003. If you remember, you probably don't remember this, but 2003 was a very important year for the world. Important year for the world in that there was a disease that came from the south. And now we know we hear of COVID now, but the first strain of this disease called SARS came in. Right? And so that was when it arrived into Beijing, and I was like, I know it's a killer disease, because we hadn't, we just been hearing it's so contagious. You would walk in the same room, someone coughed, and then you would die the next day. That's how we thought it would be like. So you would walk outside of Beijing into the courtyard where we live, which is normally, it felt like hundreds of thousands of people outside walking. Sometimes you have to, in where we live, you have to walk sideways because there's so many people. It was a ghost town. And all the restaurants were closed. All the schools were quarantined and closed. We had 2 babies at home. And so they instituted martial law. And I was like, okay, this is a time for us as a family not to die, but to go back to Boston and share about missions. And the reason why I share that story is because my wife, who's Korean American, and if you know this, Koreans and Chinese Americans are very different. Koreans, because I'm half Korean, but my wife is full Korean, they have in their DNA, often in the spirituality, the harder it is, the more spiritual. So she's got in some sense, a gift or a calling for martyrdom. That's what she is. So if it's like hard, dying, laying down your life, and it comes from the spirituality of even the missionaries, that's good. I'm more of a Chinese American. Chinese American is more practical. We've seen, in our dynasties, we've seen so many people die anyway, so why die? Let's try to live, and figure out how to live life in a very practical way. So you have 2 cultures, although you think they're the same, they're really different in the spirituality of these two cultures, and it comes back from a lot of their history as well. So I can say that as being both Chinese and Korean, so I don't offend either side. I don't know if there's a Korean here or whatever, but that's just my general picture of that. But in that case, when it comes to SARS 2003, I was a Chinese American. I was not a Korean American. And I was like, I called up my supervisor from OMF, from England, Ian Prescott, said, we want you to move out of Beijing, because from an OMF perspective, they're thinking we want a missionary to last 30, 40 years and not to last a few months after we arrive into our field of service. All right? So they're thinking the health of a missionary, and which is understandable. But Jackie, my wife, is thinking of, in some sense, what is the spiritual decision that would be the right one. Well, I prayed about it. I talked to a house church leader, and this was a woman pastor. And the first time she said, "Oh, go back. Right now there's nothing happening anyways. All the campuses are quarantined. No one can meet anyways." And so we were planning to go back. I called my supervisor. We're thinking about it. But because my wife challenged me, said, "Dave, I want you to pray about it. Maybe God's calling us to stay." And so the second time I called this pastor, I said, "We're thinking of staying." And I could just hear the tone in her voice. "You be willing to stay?" And it was almost as if she was saying, "I'm watching you," or "We're watching." And the pastors I've been working with today, they've come up and told me, and during that time, they told me, said, "We were watching you. And if you had gone back and tried to come back later, we would have just said, 'Thank you, but no thanks.'" So I learned some of these spiritual lessons actually within 3 months of arriving into Beijing of my service. And I met this pastor, Pastor Tianming, from Beijing, and he's a Tsinghua University graduate. Now, Tsinghua is like the top school in China. Tsinghua and Peking University are like MIT and Harvard. He graduated from Tsinghua University, but God called him to ministry, and his whole life has been part of suffering, but starting this house church movement in China. He is probably the most respected house church leader in China today. Served 9.5 years in house arrest at home. But when I first met him for coffee, he pretty much said, he told me later, he said, "You weren't ready," because he could just see, he said, "You wanted to do too much and you just weren't ready." But I think slowly, by the fact that we stayed and we started to work with students and we're trying to reach with young people, the Chinese church really saw that we're really with them. And I'm going to say this, not all missionaries are that way. In fact, most of them are not. In fact, most of OMF is not that way. I have to even just be honest with you, because especially in a country like China, if you work too closely with these guys, a house church, you could very easily get kicked out and never come back. So it's almost as if you're risking your career and your home and your family if you work too closely with them. But if you kind of do your own ministry and then once in a while connect with them, then you have a long-lasting ministry in China. And they've seen these missionaries that do that all the time and say, we don't want to work with you, but we'll do our own work, and then we'll just kind of, invite you to come once in a while. And they don't like that. They just say, you're competing with us. You're not really working with us. So I came in with a different model of saying, we're coming in and we're going to work with these guys. And so I started to build this kind of trust, and we were able to plant a church with this house church in Beijing, and it went from 4 people, it grew to 100 within 11 months. And I can tell you, it's a small apartment building, and it's really, once you grow to a certain size, there's a knock on the door, and it's the local police. They come in and they give us a warning, you can't meet here anymore. And then slowly, and of course the pastor there wasn't there, but the intern who was doing the PowerPoint happened to be preaching that Sunday. He had just came to Christ within the year. He gets called into the police station. And so just starting, and he is just a college graduate with maybe He's maybe 25, I think, at the time. So just 2 or 3 years right out of college. So you have young people who have just come to Christ, educated, and then they start ministry. They just preach because he happens to be the one who does the PowerPoint and he cooks. And then the church grows. I'll be honest, it's horrible preaching. The worship is not that great. But something happens when you're in that persecuted environment. There's it's just when I'm in that environment, I feel like a different person. I worship in a Chinese church in Boston. I pastored in the Chinese church in Boston. The overseas Chinese church in Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan, America, the Chinese who worship outside of that kind of context is very different from the Chinese that worship inside China. And the spirituality that is built in this persecuted church, and the reason why I'm sharing with this to you all is to show you why I think the church in China is going to eventually lead the global church overall. Now, we already know, of course, Lindsay is very humble in saying the West is already in decline, Europe. I've just noticed that there's no cross-cultural mission workshops in any session in this conference. So I know that primarily Europe is focused on how do we maintain and how do we apologetically maintain our faith in our own context. So that's where the European church is, and God bless you. The American church is actually already sent out missionaries for a long time, and they're still in that mission sending mode, but they're in decline. And even mission agencies are slowly in decline. Urbana, that used to be at 20,000, 25,000, is down to 6,000 now. So missions is sort of in North America on the tail end of a slow decline. China is at the beginning stages of an explosive growth and the rise. And the reason why I also share this is, yes, they are also reaching Beijing, just like you're trying to reach Europe. You're trying to reach your own people. They're also trying to challenge people in all sectors, and there's for planting churches. But they're also thinking is now God's given them a vision to bring the gospel outside of China. And it's this vision that I think only God has planted, not anyone. Because if it was just one person, if it's just myself or whatever, that's one thing. But it's all a timing of what God is doing in a nation in a certain season of how he has prepared that nation, and persecution has been part of that. So I remember we started this house church that we planted grew to about 150 now in 2 services. And then the pastor of that church, who was the 3rd pastor of the church that we started, because things rotate a lot very quickly. The original pastor I partnered with left after 4 months to the States. But by the time this church got to a size of 150, that pastor and Tianming and we went to Urbana 1996. Urbana 2006. And after that trip at 2006, our pastor said, I want to merge our church. Well, he wanted to move and join Pastor Tianming. Now, Pastor Tianming is considered because his churches are all intellectuals. Means his board, his elder board are all Ph.D. graduates from Tsinghua or Peking University. And so they're intellectuals, which is never seen before like that in China. And he came to Christ because Korean missionaries came into Beijing in 1989 during the Tiananmen Square and led a lot of these ethnic Korean Chinese people to Christ. They were students at the time. They lost trust in the government and they came to Christ and were discipled by Koreans. So I share that with you is to say that here we have the American missionary movement sending English teachers, thousands of them through Campus Crusade, through ELIC, into China. A lot of people came to Christ, but the Korean missionaries raised up the pastors. Because Korean missionaries are all seminary educated, they're all ordained, and they also do evangelism and discipleship. What they want to do is they want to plant churches and they want to raise up pastors. And so the pastors of these urban churches all were influenced by the Korean missionary movement. So if you take a look at it from history, you have the West coming in, spreading the gospel, planting seeds. And so now young people, when they look at a young 22-year-old coming in to teach English from Kansas City or from Texas and then they love the Lord and they say, oh, Christianity is something I might be interested in. So you had thousands of young people at that time coming in and planting all these seeds, and then you have the Korean missionaries planting the churches, and now you have a new church movement called this urban church. Completely new, actually has no historical roots to the previous generation of the Chinese church, which suffered under Mao, which is, in some sense, they came right out of not a persecuted context, but of an emerging freedom of context. But they know a lot of their elders who actually went into prison and suffered. So Doug Birdsall, 2007 comes into Beijing, and he meets with me and says, Dave, can you help me bring 250 to 300 Chinese church leaders to Cape Town? And at the time, I was leading a ministry in Beijing. We had about 20 missionaries from 6 countries, the UK, Canada, US, Hong Kong. But I felt like, this is an important thing to do. And so I approached this pastor, Pastor Tianming, and I said, this Lausanne Congress, it comes every 15 years. Would you be interested in joining me? And he said, no, it's not the right time, because right now we're still needing to expand our own church in China in the suffering context. This is right after Urbana. And I actually had to ask him 3 times. And it was the 3rd time, and he kind of said, okay, Dave, the time is ripe. And so he helped me, and we started to go across China, and we formed a team of 20 elders from the Chinese house church movement. And then we identified 230 of these house church leaders from all across China to be part of this. And also, this is very interesting, they said, we don't want to take any money from the West, and we're going to raise all our money. And this is the first time they did any kind of raising support of even mentioning money, because we're influenced by Hudson Taylor. You don't talk about money. It's the non-solicitation policy that comes from the UK. So thank you, Hudson Taylor, for that. But so this is the first time they're talking about we need to raise $1 million to get 230 people to Cape Town. Tianming, he said, the reason why it's time for China to go there, because think about it from their perspective, why go to a Congress they never heard of Lausanne before? They heard of Billy Graham, but if in the house church, Billy Graham's name is not a positive name, because he went in with the Three Self Church, which is the official church. So they see him as sort of like Christian, but you went with the compromisers, and so whenever we would travel and we would talk to a very important house church leader, and I'd say, yeah, it was started by Billy Graham and John Stott, and Pastor Tammy would kind of hit me under the table and say, just be quiet, please, don't talk. So he helped me understand a lot of all the dynamics of working in the house church context. But he said the reason why he said yes for China to come was because China is now ready for global missions. We don't need to go to the Congress, but if we want to be involved in sending missionaries globally, we got to understand what's out there. And so we need to attend Cape Town. And he knew that there was a likely chance, in fact, all the leaders, they knew there was a likely chance they wouldn't be able to go to Cape Town. Sure enough, 2010, I arrived into Cape Town with all the international deputy directors. Lindsey Brown was our leader, and sure enough, all the 200 people that we had contacted, invited, were all stopped by the Chinese government. People were wrestled to the ground as they headed to the airport. People arrived in the airport. 70 police were there to escort them back. Pretty much everyone, we had 30 house church leaders in a hotel in Beijing, surrounded by about 50 to 100 security agents, so they wouldn't leave their hotel. And so China was completely blocked, except for 2 young ladies that slipped through. And she's one of them, and I just saw her a few months ago. She came into Bangkok, and I looked at her, and she looked at me, and this is the first time I've seen her since Cape Town. And she she was one of the two that slipped, that was able to slip, because her name was given from another list. But anyways, to make a long story short, that Cape Town event, what it did was it laid the tracks for the house church movement to think how we can now be involved in global missions. And sure enough, Pastor Tianming goes into house arrest for 9.5 years in 2011. And that's what he had to pay for that. And his church got completely dismantled. He also led another movement from the underground to the surface. He rented office space of about 400 or 500 people. It used to be like 30, 40, 50 people in apartments. And he went and rented a space in the office space. And then, from then on, thousands of churches all across China followed him. So what he did was, so I asked him, and why do you need to do that? Why have to? Because when you do that, you're challenging the government. And he actually they raised $4 million to purchase a whole floor of an office building to start services. And the government found out, and they pretty much confiscated the facilities. $4 million US all got confiscated after raising it. But he has no regrets, because he says by doing that, by rising to the surface, the Chinese church, before we go and reach the world, we have to have an impact in our own society. And if we can't even conquer that, and that whenever you have a breakthrough, you always have to pay a price. This is what they learned in the house church in China. If you just want to stay quiet and have no breakthrough and whatever, and there's no cost, most likely you won't grow. But whenever there's a breakthrough, it's either a prison or a cost. And so the first day they rented the space of 400 or 500, they had a baptism of 30, 40 people. Sure enough, 40 police come charging in and try to arrest them. And just imagine this. These young people are in their 20s. First time they came to Christ. They've never been to the West. They heard the gospel just recently. They came to Christ. And now they're going to get baptized. And then you have a police coming, and they could either lose their jobs, or they could get fired, or they could not graduate from universities. And so they got to ask the question, is it worth it? So you have a young church birthed under persecution, which gives them a certain kind of do or die faith. It's not a nominal church at all. If you're a nominal Christian, you just don't come, because you don't want to lose your job. There's no cost involved. So you have that kind of environment already where Pastor Tianming, he then said, okay, Lausanne is our time to prepare for global missions. So when I meet leaders across the world and so on, I would say that he is probably one of the top global leaders. Doesn't speak any English, whatever, but he has a global leader mindset, because he sees now is the time for China to reach the world. And in order to do that, these are the things that need to take place. And this is a sacrifice that needs to take place. And so while he's under house arrest, he has 3 people outside his room, his house, 3 security guards sleeping right outside his door so that he doesn't leave. His wife can go out and buy groceries or whatever, but he can't leave. And so he lived like that for 9.5 years. But he says, he had complete peace about it, because he knew that this was the cost. If the church in China is going to do missions, we're going to experience martyrdom. We're going to experience just like what the West experienced with sending, our OMF CIM in 1990, because of the Boxer Rebellion. We had 56 missionaries who were martyred, with 21 children, babies as young as 1 year old, were killed, because Hudson Taylor sent missionaries into the inner parts of China. And so far remotely, I've met a pastor who went to a grave site of 3 CIM missionaries, 1 from Australia, 2 from the UK. And it took him 6 hours to drive from the city into the boondocks. And he had to even meet bandits there to get to even the grave site and that was 120 years ago. Where, imagine this, Hudson Taylor had the foresight to send missionaries, single ladies, that far out. And it was a cost, and we lost people. But if you look now and you talk to any of the house church leaders in China, and of course the Presbyterians came, the Methodists came, the Brethren came, and everyone loves the Western missionaries. But if you ask them, who is your number one person that you respect in China? It's always Hudson Taylor, and it's always China Inland Mission. And so when I say I'm with OMF, I just get immediate respect because they just, oh, okay, you're part of that group because you laid your lives down for us over 100 years ago. They still remember that. They don't remember anyone else. They just still remember Hudson Taylor. So the cost of what they did laid down the tracks. And so he knows that in order to go to get the Chinese church on that track, we have to also get ready to pay the price. So let me just say that is Mission China real? I'm just going to give you quickly a picture of why. I'm just going to tell you why it's real. Because people say, I hear about it and it sounds like, and yes, there's a lot of things that don't, it sounds like a lot of hype. And there's a lot of hype involved in it. But I'll just tell you what the people that I know are doing, and I'll just put it on this one page. So he, while under house arrest, because he felt so called that it's time for China's church to be involved in missions, he stepped down from his senior position of his pastor of his church while he's under house arrest. He felt really got called to be involved in mobilizing the Chinese church for missions. And then after 9.5 years under house arrest, and then he and I started a Chinese indigenous mission agency. What we realized is we have a lot of missionaries already out there, but they have no support. And so because the house church in China respects him, he can go to a church in China and say, would you be willing to support this missionary? They don't know the missionary. They don't know, but they respect him. And they trust him. So they said, okay, yes. He's kind of like like OMF. You may not trust me, but you'll trust OMF, and OMF will. So he's kind of got that kind of credibility. So we're able to now. He's able to support 50 missionaries from just his credibility, Chinese cross-cultural workers overseas, and some inside of the minority group work in China, but most of them are overseas. And that number was at least a year old. So I just put that up. And then we're also planning to do we already know that there's 2,000 missionaries all across the Middle East and South Asia and so on. So he's going to create these hubs, regional hubs, to bring these missionaries for further training. And we're connecting with Columbia International University, which used to be called Columbia Bible College, very mission-minded school to provide possibly a master's degree for some of these missionaries. So he is actually the number one pastor in China who is dedicated his whole life to be involved in mobilizing church in China for missions. And he got a team of all the top leaders in China to make that the reason why the Chinese church is going to work together. So if I were to give an analogy, and sorry, I don't know Europe really well, but I'm just going to use the U.S. because of my understanding of the U.S. So imagine, of course, I'm going to use people that I know of during my time. So, but if Tim Keller were alive, he would have gotten people like Rick Warren and John Piper and maybe Bill Hybels before he fell. Anyways, he would have gotten the top 20 pastors in the North American church and said, if we're going to work together to try to get the American church to send out missionaries. That's the only reason why we're going to partner together. We're going to also do church planting. We're also going to reach, our neighborhoods, whatever. But if we're going to do something together as a church, we're going to do that. That's the kind of spiritual leadership. And like I said, it's not just saying I want to reach Beijing. They could easily do that. Oh, I want to reach China. I want to reach every province in China. Let's make sure they're doing that. But they're saying we're trying to plant churches all across China so that these churches can raise up future missionaries to go to the Middle East, back to Jerusalem, to places where there's. So they're tying in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, to the ends of the earth. To the ends of the earth is their primary goal, not Jerusalem. Jerusalem is the means for the ends of the earth. But if you look and ask any pastor in North America right now that I know of, maybe John Piper was and is the only one, and maybe David Platt, but I haven't met another pastor in North America that makes that their primary. No one's against missions. And they all say, oh yeah, if you want to do it, great, I'll support you, whatever. But they're not saying this is the most important thing for the church to do. And that's what is so distinguishable when I see these house churches. And I think it's really birthed because of the persecuted context that has prepared the church to be that way. Another two sisters I'll share with you, Joy and Donna, and I'm just blocking because they're the first two. Well, Donna is from Shanghai, and she is the first Chinese missionary to join OMF. And, OMF has been around 150 years, and this is probably 7 years ago when that happened. And then Joy is probably the second one, missionary, and she is now in Jordan. So I'm giving you also just two sisters who are now part of the mission agency that was going to reach China. And now OMF has now, as a full member, just like I'm a full member of OMF, they are also full members of OMF. And now we have about 11 mainland Chinese who are part of OMF. Out of 1,400 members, we have about 11, but the others are more like married to an American and whatever, but they are the two supported by the Chinese church in China. So their money and their support all comes from the house church in China. That is just to show you an example of what's taking place. And this is an international mission agency. Most of the 2,000 missionaries on the field now are all on indigenous mission context, mission agencies. And then I mentioned Kelly there. She was met me in 2010, and I just met her again just a few months ago. But I asked her, so what are you doing now since 2010 at Cape Town? She said, I just travel around and I teach Kairos. Kairos is like the shortened version of Perspectives. And I've trained 2,000 people this year in Kairos. And she just goes from city to city. And she says, I have a team, I think she said about 74 staff that teaches Kairos all across China. So since then, the class of Kairos has already had 200,000 graduates from China. And this is all taking place during and after COVID, because COVID allowed them to say, well, what can we do? Well, let's get together and pray for missions and take mission classes, So that's Kelly. Next to Kelly is Pastor Job. He was also one of the top 20 leaders. If Pastor Tamming's number one, he's probably number 7 or number 8 in importance in China, but he comes from Wuhan. Well, his church in Wuhan of 600 started to get attacked by the government, so they went back into their homes. And so he moved to Bangkok, and just this past December 17th, which I was there, planted the first Bangkok Union Christian Church, that's what we call that, to reach Thai people, and it was planted by a house church leader from China. Now, the Chinese have planted churches to reach Chinese and in Chinese, and they're not, when they're in Thailand, there's some other Chinese churches, they're not thinking of reaching Thai people. They're just saying, let's have a Mandarin service to reach our own people, right? If you take a look at Chinese churches all across the world, they're just thinking of, let's just hold a service to reach our Chinese people. They're not thinking about, let's reach people not Chinese. But this pastor said, we're going to partner with the Thai church, and they joined the Thai church, and so it's a bilingual service. And so we're 6 months now, and it's Thai and Chinese, and the church is half Chinese and half Thai. And he said, the reason we're doing this is so that we can reach Thai people. So it's not the church from Taiwan, it's not the church from the Chinese church from the US or the Chinese church from Singapore, although the Singapore church has been sending out missionaries, the Taiwan church has been sending out missionaries, but the ones who have planted the first Chinese church to reach Thai people is actually a house church leader from China. And it's because his church is under attack, and so he said this is the time when China should go out. So persecution and missions is usually, God uses that also to kick the church out, like what it did in Acts chapter 8. In Jerusalem, the church was all stationed in Jerusalem, will probably be in Jerusalem for the next 200 years, and yet persecution forced them out, and that's exactly also what's taking place. And so another pastor that works with him is Pastor Ezra, and he is from, he also got warned by the police, and his father went to prison for 6 years, and so he also moved to Thailand. So they're together, two pastors are working together to plant a church to reach the Thai. So I'm just giving you just some personal people that I have met who are living in Thailand, and our family attends that church, so I know it firsthand. To just give you a picture of what's taking place in China. Arise takes off because I brought the Asian leaders together. I mentioned 2022 in October because we were preparing for the Lausanne Congress, and then I cast this vision. But when you have a vision, let's get young people excited for mission. It's just a great vision, and everyone's like, good job. So, but no money, just a vision, no staff, nothing like that. So I shared this vision with many people, all the way, everywhere, and I shared it with one of the house church pastors in Beijing. Not Tianming, but there's another guy named Ezra. These two guys are like, he's also Korean Chinese from Peking University, and they too are kind of like the two leaders. When Tianming went under house arrest, Ezra Jin's church is called Zion Church. There's his church, which is a house church, exploded in growth to about 1,800 in Beijing. Their rent alone was $500,000 a year. And the government allowed him to do that because they thought the other guy, the number one guy, they wanted to show him that he was the bad guy. So they let Ezra kind of a lot more freedom. And so what Ezra did was he started this Mission China 2030 movement, which they had a vision to send 20,000 missionaries. So Ezra is the one, when I shared this vision, he said, Dave, I want to put $50,000 down for you to start this. And then Tianming also said, okay, so he also got his church involved. Those two pastors brought in $90,000 US to start this. And then I said, okay, this must come from God because it's, and so and then I started to talk to everyone else, and then people started to come in, and then by the time, remember, this is October, we had the conference. I got the website out in December. I started to ask for speakers. Our money came in March. April, we got the convention center, and then we had the conference in July. And from 37 countries, and we got about 40 mission agencies and student ministries like university to come in and to support this. So it was really, truly a miracle for something like this to even come up so fast. But the vision behind this was to inspire the next generation to take the gospel throughout Asia to the world, and to go to where there's no gospel. You have one life, one challenge. And then these were the 5 core themes. A, meaning we align our hearts with God's heart for the world. First, we capture God's heart for the world. Second, we relinquish and surrender our lives. And that was Sarah Bruel who spoke that second night. The third night, we invited Tim Tennant to share about the Asbury revival. And that really brought a revival, or just say just a time of true repentance. And then the fourth night is when I challenged them to actually go. And our message is, in order to do this mission work, there's going to be a sacrifice involved. It's not going to be immigrating to the west of a better life. It's going to go to a place where it's more difficult, and you have to leave your family because, yes, you can. There's people who are called to reach their own people. We'll let the church do that, but we're asking you to leave your own people to reach another people. And we're challenging you to go cross-culturally somewhere. And that's when I said the response was 401 2 years and 230 long-term. But what I didn't share with you is, as I travel from country to country, it's amazing the response I'm getting from the young people who went, and they all come back. And I'll just give you a story of Mongolia. Mongolia is only 70,000 Christians, very young, within the last maybe 40 years, a young church. So we had a meeting, a Rise meeting of young people at a church about this size, had a little bigger, but had about 30 people in the room, 25 young people. And I challenged them for this long cross-cultural missions. I wanted them to raise their hand. Literally, every young person raised their hands. We already have people from Mongolia who raised their hands back in last summer who are already on the mission field. The thing about the Mongolians are they're nomads. And so they just pick up their tent and go. They say, oh yeah, I'll commit and I'll go. They don't think about, well, is the money going to be there? Whatever. They have a little more of that Genghis Khan, we're going to conquer the world. And so the Mongolian church is like, even though it's the smallest, it's got some of the most active young people who are going to be on the mission field. The pastor in the green here, we had about 6 people give their testimonies. saying, you know, I pastor a church of 50 young people, and already 5 people from my church are going to go cross-cultural missions. And he kind of joked, said, on the one hand, I'm really upset because I'm going to lose 5 of my best people, right? That's 1/10 of his congregation. So I use that example, and I go across Asia. I said, if you think your church is small, like the Japanese church, they think their church is small. Your church is 700,000 versus 70,000. You're 10 times the size of the Mongolian church. And you say, oh, we only have 20, 30. So if the Mongolians can do it, so it's very interesting. You could use a certain culture to say, you know, that's no excuse. You know, so that's why I try to say, the Europeans, you have no excuse. You say, well, we're attacked by the secular whatever. Well, the Mongolian church, you know, they just came up, and if they're thinking about sending their youth, why can't you guys? Okay, I'm just going to use that one example. But how about okay, so this is these young people all getting ready to go out. As of today, this is the Philippine Cebu. That took place maybe 4 months ago. And then they had a rise the second, every other month in Philippines. They're doing an Arise movement. As of today, they have one in the Philippines. As of today, 381 people are at this Arise event in a city called Butuan in the Philippines. And then the next one is going to be Davao. And every other month, they're doing an Arise conference. And young people are coming and getting challenged. And people are giving their lives to go cross-culturally. So that's the Philippines, right? This is the story I want to share. If I'm going to end with a story, is Pakistan. As you just probably, I don't know if you heard, as of yesterday, I got this video text of Christians being beat up because of, you know, the burning of a Quran kind of thing, and on the streets of today. And they held an Arise Pakistan last month, which they invited me to be a speaker. And I tell you, 250 kind of, if you remember the Mount Hermon, when the 251 college students from 89 campuses and then 100 gave their lives to cross-cultural missions. There were about 200 young people, 50 pastors and church leaders, you know, professors from Foreman, presidents of seminary, mega church pastors of 10,000 were speaking at this event. And I challenged the young people at the very end there. And I'll tell you right here, if you take a look at this picture right here, 60 young people came up to the front. And my challenge to them was, I'm saying this is not everyone. In fact, I wish that we need the Apostle Peters to make the church strong. So if you're called to strengthen the church in Pakistan, this is not for you. I'm calling the Apostle Paul's. That means you're going to leave, go to a place where it's probably more difficult and it's not immigrating to the West. I made it very clear. And I said it could be a life of suffering and possibly martyrdom and death. So I set the bar high, not low. And this is what I noticed is that we often think, well, let's try to bring the young people in. You set the bar low. They don't see the gospel as any precious when you're just trying to make it better music or better lights or smoke and kind of thing. They can go to Disneyland and have a better entertainment. They'll go to Taylor Swift conference and get far more entertainment than a church worship. The best worship, you know, experience at a church is not going to even compete with Taylor Swift, right? So, but you give them, you're going to die for a cause. That's why I said, the reason why they're responding is because they told us, this is the first time the church has challenged us at this level. It's because they're giving us a cause to die for. That means the gospel that you believe is worth dying for, so I'm going to give my life to it. And so 60 young people came to the front and committed themselves to cross-cultural missions. And I wasn't doing any kind of like, you know, the way that I call people is very just, you know, there's not lights, whatever. And even the pastor from the Philippines came and said, hey, how do you do that? It's like you don't like use emotions because, you know, you just give the plain, this is what we're asking you to do. And young people responded, you know. So this is an example of the, you know, we have women, of course, and men all coming up to the front. And so I think this is just the beginning of a student volunteer movement in Pakistan. And it just took place last year. And imagine what the student volunteer movement did with 100 young people, and it just launched a movement. They're going to go back and start something in Pakistan. Myanmar. Okay. Myanmar, you probably hear it in the news, under civil war, 85% of the country is fighting with each other. We're fighting with the government. And so this ministry called VIA. They're involved in mobilization. They invited me because they heard about Rise. They also were part of it. So I came here to speak 10 minutes to about 400 young people in Myanmar, Rangoon, or in Yangon, about missions. I shared about Arise. I said, what about the idea, let's do Arise in Myanmar? And the pastor, I never met him before. He just came up after me and said, okay, everyone, I want you to write down 3 or 4 names of people we're going to invite to have an Arise Myanmar this year. And so afterwards, I came down and I talked to this Pastor Tungpi. I said, so can we actually do an Arise conference under civil war? I said, don't worry, we'll figure it out. He said, so I said, how many people do you think you can bring? He said, maybe 1,000 or 2,000 young people we could probably do. Let's pray for about 1,000 or 2,000. And that was even before the draft that came. That they're drafting everyone who's the age that we're trying to bring into to challenge 18 to 30-year-old. You're pretty much, if you're that age range. So he said, okay, you know what we're going to do? We're going to make this conference from 14 to 45, so that if the government asks us what age range, we say, oh, we got the younger folks, and so they figure a way out to deal with the draft situation. And then I just talked with them a few days. He said, well, thousands of young people have fled the country. They're in Bangkok now, which is where I am right now. He says, so maybe we'll do an Arise event here in October, but maybe in December we'll do an Arise event in Bangkok. So war is no excuse for them. So that's why I'm trying to say secularization is no excuse for Europe. If they can do it, why can't you? That would be my final message. If there's a message from Asia to the North America and to Europe, don't make any excuses. We need to get our young people to go where there is no gospel.